afternoon. Thanks for coming. My name is Tim Johnson. Freedom of choice. That's what I like about you guys. I've spoke at several different organizations and so forth lately, and I got to be honest with you. When Bob came to me, him and I know each other. I don't see him in the room right now, but anyways, him and I played a major role in House Bill 523, which I'll get to later. I'll also get to the new movement that's coming out. But when he came to me first said, well, yeah, you want to come speak to the Libertarian Party at a luncheon? I was like, well, you know, I've never done that before. So, yeah, my knowledge isn't the greatest. Other than a quick review before I got here, I honor you guys in what you do, and I do appreciate it. Hopefully not stabbing myself in the back, but as an individual, I kind of look at it from an independent viewpoint when it comes to politics. So, some things I like, some things I don't like. So I try not to label myself. Anyways, with that, I am Tim Johnson, a member of Law Enforcement Against Prohibition. A little bit about myself real quick. I am a retired United States Air Force veteran, retired law enforcement for 20 years here in the local Franklin County area. Prior to my law enforcement and after, let's see, Air Force and then college and then some public sector work. I worked as a private investigator also for 5 years, and then I got into law enforcement. I just retired a few years ago from law enforcement because I figured out that 20-year-olds could outrun me now, and 30-year-olds were hard to handle. So as we grow older, we figure those things out. So once I retired, I knew about LEAP, and I wanted to be a part of them. The problem was, while I was employed, I'm not allowed to be associated with them. Unfortunately, that's the way the laws in the state of Ohio go. That's the way, when I raised my right hand up and swore into the state of Ohio as a police officer, I did not realize I was giving away my constitutional rights. However, that happened. So with that, as a police officer, I've worked from federal to local drug task force units from a multiple variety of areas. I've worked a lot of investigations. The whole 20 years I was on the street as a patrol officer. I retired as a senior patrol officer. The office wasn't for me. I enjoyed the people. I liked the people. I liked being with them. I worked the school systems for 15 years. I developed multiple programs. I actually developed a safe schools program prior to Columbine. Of course, back in those days, in the 90s, trying to implement something like that into the school systems, the administrators and the school boards and stuff looked at you like you were crazy. That stuff don't happen. Columbine happened. Other events smaller than that had happened before then. So after about 5 to 10 years, depending on which school district I worked with, finally got them to understand if the school's on fire, what do you do with the kid? You get them out. All right, so that's how the mentality I had to go to. So if somebody comes into the school with a weapon of any choice, or to be disruptive, to cause harm to someone, the initial program, I don't know if any of you heard, was called the Alice program. Let's put everybody in the corner, turn the lights out, lock the door, hope the bad guy don't find us. When I found out about that, I wasn't real happy with it. I went to the administrators and so forth. I said, wait a minute. If somebody comes in the school to harm the kids, to harm the teachers, or whoever's in there, get out. Get away from danger. Let me run to the danger. That's my job. That's what I do. So after the many meetings and me teaching a program of mine underneath the table, which I called a black market program, teaching with the schools independently, which they loved. When the school administrators finally came around and said, hey, let's do this. Well, the schools already knew how to do it because I'd been teaching it to them. So that's one of the things that I focus on, along with other programs of feeding the homeless. The guy was talking about taking a family, while you guys are eating, getting a family that's having a hard time around the holidays or something like that. I did a lot of community outreach programs such as that. Blankets and coats and so forth. Every year, 5 families, we would raise $100 for each family and go buy groceries and made sure they got the groceries instead of the $100. So I did quite a few things in that area as well. Also, as a field training officer, I dealt a lot with veterans coming back from the Middle East War. 5 in total, all with different perspectives of how law enforcement should be. Off of that, I learned a lot myself. I have never seen combat personally myself. I've been very close to it, and that's about as far as I'll say. But seeing these women and men that came back that I trained, what they went through and so forth, having to debrief them once I got them in my control of, you're not at war anymore, now you're in the community, you gotta treat people differently. The best weapon you have is not that firearm on your side, it's your mouth. It's your respect for people and respect for society as a whole. How you treat and talk to that person, you will be surprised. When I have somebody holding a knife to another person's throat and I got 5 officers around them, all with guns pointed at them, I'm wondering, well, who's gonna get hit? And I simply walk up and say, Mary, would you like to go get an ice cream cone with me? The knife went down, Mary went over and sat in the back of my cruiser, we went and got an ice cream cone. Then we dealt with the situation afterwards. Something as simple as that can break an incident, rather than the aggression that typically runs through the human brain. When you have a firearm on your side and a badge on your chest, you feel like Almighty himself. It's your authority. It's not your authority to take life, it's your authority to save lives. And that's what I had to train and teach people. For myself, pat myself on the back, I think I did a fairly decent job on it. No one ever used a firearm under my watch. Not to say that we didn't pull them out every single day, but it was a tool as anything else. Law Enforcement Against Prohibition, we'll get to them. Founded in 2002, it's an international organization. It's made up of law enforcement officers, law enforcement personnel, judges, prosecutors, clergy, correction officers, professional people from all walks of life. We're well over 180,000 strong now. We are in 20 different countries now. Our slogan is, cops say legalize drugs. Real simple slogan. Not what most people think when I usually first say that. At a lot of my engagements, a lot of my events, some people have gotten them walked out. What we're saying on that, and briefly what I'll do is, real quick, is if we go back into history, when we say cops say legalize drugs, we're talking about prohibition here. If you go back into history, 1918 to 1933, alcohol was illegal. Al Capone and the boys were at their highest. Crime was at one of the highest rates. Murders and homicides. Illegal cash was at one of the highest rates this country's ever seen. As soon as it went legal in 1933, or re-legalized, I should say, prohibition was gone, everything dropped, and it's dropped since then. We're seeing that same effect happening in states where they're, what they're calling, I call it re-legalize marijuana. If you hear me say cannabis, it's the same thing. Marijuana is Hispanic for cannabis, and I'll get to that point in a moment here as to why we use that name. People ask why. Why do you want to legalize drugs? Why can't we just stop it? We can't. I'll give you an example. We've been at it for, a lot of people say we've been at it for 40 years, since 1972, when Nixon, or 1970 or so, when Nixon started the, let's start a war on drugs for racial reasons. 1937, Henry Anslinger said, let's put a tax stamp on marijuana. The DuPont family and another family, well known here in the U.S. at the time, said, no, you can't do that, we'll lose a bunch of money because of the value of it, of hemp and cannabis. Wasn't gonna happen. So when we say it's a 42 year drug war, I always like to say, no, it's really it's since 1937, so it's an 90 year drug war is what we're really looking at here. And the reason we can't stop it, I'll give you a quick example here. Probably about halfway through my career or so, we had a couple of twin brothers, Mike and Matt. They were heroin dealers, crack dealers, prescription drug dealers, anything, opiates, or anything they could get a hold of, they would deal. In a 2-week period, our department, through investigations, we did 3 no-knock warrants. A no-knock warrant is very intrusive, it's very violent, it's very fast, it's quick. We're not always sure who's in the house. When we go in, we try to have intel from in there. If anybody doesn't know what the no-knock warrant is, very simple to get. For law enforcement, I walk up in front of the judge and say, I swear that I believe this is what's going on, and the judge said, boom, there's my evidence, is my hand being raised. That's how easy it is to get in your house for law enforcement. For a burglar, they just walk in. So anyways, we worked 3 no-knock warrants. When we did that, the SWAT team that we used, you shoot the windows out of the house. We went in and got Mike and Matt. We arrested them once with possession of stuff. They went to court, they were out on bond. A few days later, we did it again. Second time. They went to court, they were out. Third time we got them, at the end of the 2nd week, they had more stuff on them. We took them in and we finally asked the judge, the prosecutor and stuff, why do you keep letting them go? Well, they gave the story of the jails are filled, you know, they're staying around, they've been staying around, but yeah, but they're still dealing, they're still making money off of it, so there's still that excitement for the profit. The drug supply kept coming. We kept making arrests. Well, finally on the 3rd time, we convinced them to please put the bond high enough that the family can't afford to get them out. They did, thank God for us. So with that, we were able to get Mike and Matt off the street from that point. But did that stop the drugs? No. A couple houses that way, a couple houses that way, they started doing it. You still have clientele. You still have addicts. You still have people that want that product. So somebody's gonna get it to them. So that's why we say that we can't stop the flow of drugs. We can't stop the supply. It's because of the amount and the immense amounts of money that's put into it from cartels and gangs. The outcome of things that they get from it as well. The story I saw just the other day, which I already had insight on it myself due from experience, cartels will typically out of the country, let's say, that are bringing stuff into the country. We'll just use the Mexican border. They'll send 1 pound, for every 1 pound that we confiscate, 10+ pounds of cannabis get through. For every 1 pound of heroin, every 1 pound of cocaine that we confiscate, 10+ pounds of heroin or cocaine get through. They do it, they call them dummy loads. So we're not putting a dent in it at all. We're not stopping it. We're spending $51 billion a year trying to eradicate cannabis alone. There's more cannabis grown in this state, in the United States than cornfields. That's how much is here. So we're not gonna get rid of it.
Show me where your farm is.
It's there. It's soon come on.
And our next convention will be.
With that, as I said, Prohibition, it was in 1937 when Henry Anslinger, well, let me go back a little first. Try to touch on cannabis real easy. In 1850 to 1942, marijuana was in the pharmacopoeia book. That's a PDR, Physician's Desk Reference. It was actively used in multiple types of ailments and illnesses. It was a well-known medicine. The funny thing about it, in the 1920 era, with Al Capone, whenever law enforcement would show up, the agents, and they'd do the raid looking for alcohol, because they were using alcohol to extract do the extractions from cannabis. Cannabis was legal. It was the alcohol that was illegal. So when they left, they took all the alcohol and they left the cannabis stuff there. It's still legal. So as I said, in 1937, Henry Anslinger comes along as the first drug czar. He decided that the blacks and the Hispanics down along the west, out west, down along the Texas border and everything are causing all the problems in the U.S. Had nothing to do with us coming over here and annihilating the Indians, but anyways, it had to do with, that was their look on it at the time. So they did what they called a tax stamp. Tax stamp like they did on the Tommy gun. So when you went to go get your Tommy gun or you wanted your cannabis, they didn't have any tax stamps for you. So was it legal or was it not legal? It was legal if you had a tax stamp. If you didn't have the tax stamp, well, then they looked at it differently. Finally, in 1970, Richard Nixon, against the Pfeiffer Commission, decided that he was going to declare a war on drugs, blaming it primarily from a racial disparity point of view, that it was blacks and Hispanics again that were causing the problem. They were the ones using it. Contrary to that, or him going against his board that advised, no, there's no reason to make cannabis illegal, none whatsoever. It's the illicit drugs that we need to focus on. They had no scientific, no medical proof of any kind at all that cannabis caused harm to the human body. None. They had a lot of it, but he wouldn't allow it to come in as far as the medical stuff from the pharmacopoeia. Around that same era, a little before that, in 1914, you could, out of the Sears Roebuck catalog or at the store, you could go into the store and buy a syringe full of heroin and or cocaine, and have it delivered to your house if you bought it out of the magazine, or you could walk into the store and buy it yourself. Until, I think it was 1918, they started the Narcotics Act. So what we found through Prohibition, from Henry Anslinger and also from Richard Nixon's deals, is that it's not working. The stuff is still, it's not only is it coming in more nowadays, what we found is that the cartels now have focused, because over half the United States have legalized it in some form, that's cannabis, have re-legalized it. The cartels have now started doing human trafficking. They're also picking it up on the drugs like heroin and cocaine. So they're bringing that type of stuff, because we're not making that here. We are making cannabis in an abundance. So that's one of the problems that we're seeing as far as where Prohibition fails and the drug war is not working. As far as that goes, the crime costs are actually, when we look at them, as far as LEAP does, they look at this and they do studies on this stuff on a daily basis, basically, is that Prohibition actually increases the funding from drug sales, increases the funding for the gangs and for the cartels. Prohibition, then crime rates rise. When you don't have prohibition, crime rate drops. The other costs that we follow are the endangering of law enforcement officers' lives. We lose law enforcement officers every day. You just don't hear about it. There are school shootings in this country every day. You just don't hear about it. And it's as a result, the endanger, as I said, losing law enforcement officers and civilian every day is on working drug warrants or just working undercover or whatever. We're losing people every day simply because of the drug war. It also, as well as that, diverts law enforcement. As you come onto a department, what you kind of pick out is, what's the easiest, simplest thing to do for me to meet my performance standards at the end of the month? Well, let's see, cannabis is out there everywhere. Let's make a traffic stop, get a good smell, and arrest somebody for a joint, okay? Let's drive around in a car and catch somebody for a traffic violation. So what we find out doing, hopefully that traffic violation, then law enforcement says maybe that'll lead to a real nice drug arrest. That's how we're programmed, through propaganda, through our training. Well, what we found is it actually diverts law enforcement away from where the crimes are really happening. A crime is something that's committed against another person or against society. If you're smoking a joint and sitting in a park, are you against doing anything to hurt society? Are you doing anything to harm yourself? No, but that was my first arrest. 19-year-old kid sitting in a park, minding his own business. I pulled up in a cruiser. He knew me, I knew him, because everybody, I love the kids. I worked in the schools. His name was John. I walked up to him, I knew what he was doing. I started talking with him. I was holding the joint in my hand. Actually, when my field training, because I had just started, my field training officer pulled up, wanted to know what I had. We back each other up. And when I showed him what I had, well, from there it escalated to I had to make an arrest. Officers do have discretion at a certain point whether to write a ticket or not write a ticket, whether to go ahead and enforce the law or not enforce the law. It's officer's discretion as long as you are solo. When another officer, a supervisor, whoever shows up, it's kind of a letter of the law, and under ethics is that you enforce that law. Rather than the spirit of the law, it's the letter of the law, enforce it. So with that, I arrested John over a half a joint. Come to find out, when we first went to court, John's in his second year of school under grants. John's got a part-time job. John was well known in school. John's got a driver's license. After the court hearing was over, John lost his job. John lost his college tuition. John lost his driver's license, all over that. John then became a problem in the community. So after I worked with him for a while over the whole ordeal, and I realized what was really going on then, we did get him straightened out, and he did get on the right track. Actually got him back in school, got him a job, got his license back and everything. It just took a couple years. A couple years of his life was taken. So those are some of the costs that we see happening in society. Social cost, what I just explained to you right there, the 19-year-old, that as well as the mass incarceration of our jails. They're filled, literally filled, with minor drug offenses from back in the 60s and 70s. People are still in there. From the 80s, they're still incarcerated. I'll be doing a show in the end of October with an individual that did 30 years for a few pounds of pot back in the 60s he got caught with. And did 30 years in prison, that's it. Over a few pounds of cannabis. Marijuana. The reason we call it marijuana was Henry Anslinger, the one I told you back in 1937. He didn't know what the plant was. They called it loco yoco. The Hispanics called it marijuana. That's what it meant to them. Marijuana is Spanish for cannabis, the cannabis sativa plant. So that's why I call it both. He did it based basically off of a race. Richard Nixon, he did the same thing. When Richard Nixon started the war on drugs, what he did was, and one of our other speakers has a good example of it. His department at the time had 7 narcotics officers. This was back in the 60s. He had 7 narcotics officers. There wasn't a war on drugs. There wasn't a problem with drugs. And in the early 70s, as soon as Nixon says there's a war on drugs, and he threw out all these millions and billions of federal tax dollars to all the law enforcement agencies and said, beef up your narcotics units and go get them. He went from a 7-man to a 70-man narcotics unit. So what's that tell you? Instead of 7 guys out making arrests, which he said we couldn't do it because we couldn't find drug dealers. We couldn't find the drugs. Well, they weren't there. I mean, yeah, there was, cannabis was always out there. They'd find a little LSD or a little cocaine and so forth. When they declared the war on drugs, everything became relevant. Everything became prevalent to the point that it was out there in masses. There was a large demand for it. Now, instead of 70 narcotics officers in this police department, the federal government is supporting another 63, totaling 70. So you think about the amounts of arrests they went out and made. What that did was it took officers away from the neighborhoods where the burglaries were going on, where the thefts were going on. It took them away from getting out and playing basketball or football with the kids. It took them away from getting out and playing jump rope. Yep, did it. I'll confess, all right? With the young ladies and so forth. That's what it did. It took us out of the community and put us out on the street, stopping every car that moved, walking every person that wasn't my color, or stopping every person that wasn't my color that was walking down the street, and finding out what they're up to. And we became very good at it. Because you guys spend a lot of money in tax dollars on building new facilities that are full. And we keep filling them up. So that's what the war on drugs, as far as with that, has done. It's also created a large gap, social disparity as far as the trust of minorities in the criminal justice system and law enforcement as a whole. Now, I will say this, in the Franklin County area, the departments and so forth, the majority of us have a wonderful working relationship with the communities and the law enforcement agencies compared to some other parts of the country that we've seen. But it's something that, believe it or not, leaders of this central Ohio area has something they've practiced and practiced and rehearsed and rehearsed. It's what they want. Now, yeah, you still have, and everybody does, every organization does, they have that bad person that's gonna cause problems, gonna cause troubles. The person that's gonna go out there gonna cure the world. My field training officer told me, you do what I teach you to do, and within 5 years, there'll be no drugs in your community. Okay, I said, well, there's a pharmacy over there, what are we gonna do about that? That's not a problem. It's not? Okay. It is a problem. Pharmacy, or pharmaceutical medications is the #1 problem that we have right now, okay? I'm getting a warning back here, so I'm going to go through this real quick here now. Re-legalize, re-regulate all drugs is what LEAP speaks on, is what we practice on. It's our thing. What we mean by that, if we can regulate it, first you gotta legalize it, and then you can regulate it. You can't regulate it if it ain't legal. So if you regulate it, give you a good example of Switzerland real quick. Switzerland has a program, they have a needle exchange thing. They had a real bad heroin problem over there. So what they did was, people were just dying every day on the streets. Bad needles, bad coke, or bad heroin, which we're seeing now. Mansfield did 8, like in the last week, I think it was, overdoses. Yeah. It's everywhere. What happened with Switzerland, they said, let's do this. Give it to the doctors, let them control it. So they have a program. You can exchange, you come in and get clean needles if you need them. You don't gotta get the dirty ones off the street or keep reusing them. You set up an appointment with a doctor. You go in with the doctor, they administer the amount that's feasible for you to have for the day. Out the door you go to do your thing. What they've found is they've had a large decrease in crime. They've actually lost or had a big decrease in the use of heroin and diseases. They've had a big drop in that as well. That's one country that's done that. Portugal's another one that has done a full decriminalization of all drugs that they're working on now. Instead of incarcerating people, making people criminals, they're working with them. That's why we have social services. That's why we have people that are psychiatrists and psychologists and so forth, and health centers that work with us, okay? With that, as far as LEAP, what I will tell you is this, I laid some literature out on the table there. If you want to become involved, it's free. Fill it out, read what's there. You can get a hold of the LEAP organization that way at copssaylegalizedrugs.com, info@leap.cc, and www.leap.com. Real quick here, I know I only got a few minutes. The newest movement in Ohio, aside from the one that Bob and I about lived in the State House over, of course we got told to sit down a few times down there because we were both long-winded, so several of the politicians I think got tired of listening to us. But here's the new amendment, and half of it's for signatures. This is the new initiative for 2017 to November. It's called Grassroots Ohio. You can go to, you'll find it, just push it in, put it in Google, and it'll come up, Grassroots Ohio. You'll see the whole petition, or the text and the amendment language is on there. It's already been approved. They're collecting signatures now. Trying to get fundraisers and so forth like that going, because those things are expensive to do. So they're doing what they can. It is about industrial hemp and full legalization of medicinal cannabis. So it's something totally different. It's absolutely great. With that, on 523, House Bill 523, that you think goes into effect on September 8th, I'll just do a question and answer on it. Does anybody have any, or do you understand what it is, House Bill 523?
I have a general understanding of it. To my understanding, it legalizes only concentrates for use?
No.
What is it legalized? And then I know that
It legalizes plant extracts.
So yeah,
Okay.
concentrates. So concentrates. That's what concentrates.
Well, there'll be concentrates, there'll be oils, there'll be concentrates, what they call dabs, and so forth, like that. We can't get a clear answer whether or not there's gonna be a bud, the actual bud from the plant, which is what all the extraction comes from. They call it plant material. So they won't say the actual bud. But what 523, make it short and sweet for you, what it has become, last November when RO issue 3 was turned down because everybody said it was a monopoly, well, now you got a government monopoly. You got a handful of politicians and a handful of millionaires that control the whole entire state of Ohio. They've given 20 different ailments that they're gonna use it for. It's a cash-only business. To give you an example, no insurance, no Medicare, no Medicaid, nothing like that covers it. Of the 20 ailments, if you got ailment 21, tell yourself how you would feel when they say no, because it actually is good for well over 300 ailments. It's scientifically proven beyond, with a preponderance of evidence, irrefutable scientific proof. Bob knows as well as I do, we presented that to 3 different committees down at the State House. And we came up with this. 523, I call it the 1% bill. I think it's biased on the fact of the types of ailments that it covers. It is what it is now. There's a point, probably maybe seeing it on the news somewhere, attorneys are not allowed to be involved in the industry. So get ready for that lawsuit. I don't know where that one came from. We're still scratching our heads on that one. Being that attorneys drafted it up. So that's kind of where it's at. No, it does not go legal on somewhere around September 8th. That is the commission that has to be formed by then. And then there is a timetable. If you follow the timetable, you can actually go to OhioCannabisAssociation.com and it'll show you there's a timetable on there. It'll show you what's happening. So actually in September of 2018 is when they expect this House Bill 523 to be implemented and in full operation and working properly. The problem is the business is supposed to be built like this with the strength on the bottom. It's built like this because when you have to go into a pharmacy and pay $300 to $500 a week cash out of your pocket for the medication, or you have to pay $1,000 to $2,000 a month because it's for cancer, you're probably not going to be able to afford it. Thus and therefore, I look for the industry to collapse in Ohio unless they make some drastic change. It's a business. I've been in business. You build them from the bottom up, not from the top down, and that's what they've done. They've kind of cornered the whole market. Basically, as I said, a handful of politicians and a handful of wealthy people, and they feel like they're doing the right thing. It's a step in the right direction, but it does need a lot of improvements. With that, anything, I'll stick around for a few minutes or whatever. I got business cards or stuff on the table.
If anybody has any questions for him, we got another 5 to 10 minutes for questions. I just want to make sure that we got
Go ahead.
Do you have an update on the legislation that was seeking to ban, at least in part, driver's license suspensions for drug offenses? You know where that stands?
They're working on that now. Actually, last Monday I spoke to 85 mayors in Worthington from all over the state of Ohio, and they're lost. They don't know what to do. Here's what people are confused about when they think that medical cannabis makes cannabis or marijuana legal in the state of Ohio. No, it doesn't. You still have all your regular criminal statute that address all the black market cannabis. Black market people are real happy right now because they've taken that stereotype off of cannabis is bad for you. So now that people are like, oh, well, look at all this scientific proof. Look, I mean, when you look under a microscope and you see things from cannabis that are killing cancer cells, if you don't believe after that, there's something wrong. When you see a young child go from over 100 seizures a day down to 1 a day, and you don't believe, and it's based off of the medicinal cannabis they've been given, I don't know how else to convince you. I've seen it all. I went and looked for it. I've been in the cannabis business for 40 years. Wait a minute, he's only law enforcement for 20. Yeah, I was. Is what it is. I grew up in the 60s and the 70s. Went into military in college, or military in the mid-70s. I was exposed to it from the age of 18 to what I am now, 58. So That's what I always, when I down there at the State House, I told them, I've been in business and just doing it personally and legally, or under the legal class law or legal arm of law and so forth. For 40 years I've been doing this. What have you guys been doing? You know, so there's my experience in it. There's my knowledge. Where's yours come from? But no, that's being addressed. How they're going to do it. There is no scientific proof of how many nanograms it takes to impair your driving. Right now, the thing is 5 nanograms. That was when a bunch of people sitting around a table and somebody goes, let's just use 5. That means they're impaired. And that's what most states went with. You know how much an Olympian is allowed to have in their system? 150 nanograms. And you can still be an Olympian.
But not drive a car.
Go ahead.
Is there any discussion in your organization about federal legislation versus, because everything you talked about talks about what happens with the state of Ohio. My concern is all that we do have states tying their noses for federal statutes. We have a greater constitutional crisis than anyone wants to avoid.
Right.
So what is being done to get the federal government to either back off or coordinate something more reasonable?
Federal government is kind of like a bully right now in the neighborhood. The bully says, okay, I'm gonna leave you alone for the next month. You do what you wanna do. And that's what the federal government has said they'll do. The DEA has stepped aside and says, okay, other than international incidents or things that we're working that are large, we're gonna let the states do what they wanna do. So that's why you see in states starting to re-legalize it in some form or another. All of a sudden things are happening, okay? It's still a Schedule 1, which means it has no medicinal value. All right, so we're still trying to figure that one out. That's not up to us, all right? We already know that it has medicinal value.
Can the president reschedule it now the DEA has
No,
said that?
the president can't do nothing. President is a
It doesn't
puppet.
mean he doesn't try.
The president tells the Congress what he would like to have done, but the Congress decides what to do.
Well,
So-
wasn't it DEA that refused to?
The DEA refused to cooperate with them. All right, they're under the judicial, go ahead.
Wouldn't the drug war be effectively ended for 4 years if there were a president who believed in the Constitution and pardoned everyone who was being charged with any drug offense? As soon as the district attorney charges him, president issues a statement, I pardon so-and-so. That would end the drug. Why would that not end the drug war for 4 years?
It's probably, I'm gonna say it's not libertarian.
I say it's
It's not free
libertarian.
choice, you know,
What?
well,
I
with the
said-
government we have now.
I
Their
said
viewpoint.
I said a libertarian president.
Well, a libertarian president, that'd be great.
Yes.
I'd put him in today if I could.
So
Not a
me
problem.
too.
But
We're trying.
A president who even just believed in the Constitution and understood it would be able to end the drug war for 4 years just by pardoning every. The district attorneys would get tired of charging people if 10 minutes later they were gonna get a pardon.
Right, you're seeing some of that now.
Governors too.
Real quick,
Governors too, yes.
the biggest problem is it being a Schedule 1, federal government just, they're trying to do what they can with that, they're not doing a real good job at it, they're basically waiting for the next president to come in and let them make that decision, hopefully, and work with, Congress and Senate and so forth to get that done and so on, okay? That's what we're hoping for to happen, and get it descheduled out of Schedule 1. What we'd like to see it go to is a Schedule 5 where tobacco and alcohol, the number 1 and number 2, most harmful drugs known to mankind and most problematic in society are Schedule 5s. That's where we would like to see cannabis go to. So, that's where it
I got 2 more
is.
questions.
Again, what part of the Constitution authorizes the Fed Gov to schedule drugs?
The DEA
General welfare clause, like everything
No,
else.
the DEA
That's rubbish. Welfare, general
That's
welfare
legitimate.
helps everybody, the drug war doesn't help everybody, it doesn't help.
It doesn't, no, the DEA
SOBs
does
who are in
that.
prison.
Believe it or
Well,
not, the FDA has nothing to do with it.
No, where does the Constitution authorize the DEA?
It doesn't, they just did
Exactly.
it.
Yeah, okay.
It's
This
just
is-
important.
We got one more question over
I
there.
know you did.
Congress.
We met a woman last night.
So with the medical,
She works directly with the FDA.
under state law, and federal is very separate. How does it impact?
Veterinarian.
I'm glad you asked that, because it's kind of funny, because our glorious politicians down there forgot about that. The CCW, in reference to this terrible drug called cannabis, marijuana. You can walk around with a pocket full of Percocets or a pocket full of Oxycontins with a sidearm right here under CCW, and you're good to go.
After I had
All right,
surgery
no,
this summer,
we brought it up to
on
them.
my prescriptions.
Yeah, all of us, what they're working on that, and that'll be a promulgated law by the commission. What it is, they'll create a whole new set of statutes for medicinal cannabis, and that's one of them. The OVI, as you referred to back there, there'll be a law for that under medicinal cannabis, and there'll be a separate law as well for the CCW. So if you don't have medicinal cannabis, the law is going to apply different to you if you get caught with either one of those. So it's going to be two sets of laws, and that's why I said the mayors, for mayor's courts and stuff like that, were just baffled and kind of lost. And I understand why. We tried to explain to them that, here's what's happening. So other than that, it went real well. With that,
Thank you so much.
thank you so much.
I'm sure he'll stick around to ask a few
Yeah.
questions afterwards, but thank you so much for coming.
You are more than welcome. Thank you. I'd say that the LEAP organization as a whole, we appreciate the support that we get from the Libertarian Party and viewpoints of the simple phrase of freedom of choice, where I guess the two parties or the two organizations kind of come together. It's fantastic what we see from you guys going on and the support that you give to us. As far as our viewpoints with the re-legalization of all drugs, it's based upon anything that once it's legalized and regulated is controlled. There's irrefutable evidence out there to show that once something like that is done, as we learned from alcohol in the 20s, crime rates do drop, death rates do drop, things become better.
What would you say to fellow police who are on the job now? If you got a chance, I'm sure you get to talk to them all the time. What would you say to them, and then what would you say to, let's start with that, and then I'll ask another question.
Well, to the fellow officers now, and I still have the most respect for law enforcement. Had a lot of good friends there and so forth, so I still have some contacts and respect the career field. It's a necessary thing in society. What I tell them is to educate themselves on it, which most of them are. The problem or the issue with it is that it's not an acceptable thing either through society or through the career field. You can't even be associated with an organization that associates itself with cannabis. Otherwise, you stand a chance of losing your state license, which is handled through the state licensure board, which is the Attorney General. So you stand for repercussion from not only that, but also the repercussion of other officers that don't believe in it. And I don't want to use the word of ignorance, but I would say lack of knowledge, lack of education of it. But it's there. If you go out and review, if you look it up, we have the wonderful internet nowadays. Look it up on there. It's from all over the world. It's been studied. It's been legal in the past.
Some of the stuff you mentioned, have you read that book, Chasing the Scream? It talks a lot about, what's it, Anslinger? And,
Henry Anslinger?
Yeah. I'll send you a link to that book.
Okay.
It's in one book, and I'm running out of, I gotta rejuice this here, but we got